Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we were taking a quiet journey into the flickering heart of medieval Europe, a world where life looked radically different depending on who you were born as. Castles and crowns may dominate our imagination, but beneath them lived a far larger population whose lives followed entirely different rules. This is a journey into the everyday reality of those people, the peasants, who made up the vast majority of medieval society. Most people who lived in the Middle Ages were peasants, not nobles, not knights, not clergy, but farmers, laborers, and families tied directly to the land. Their work fed kingdoms, supported wars, and sustained cities, yet their lives rarely appear in chronicles or illuminated pages. By watching this video, you'll learn how their days were shaped by land, labor, faith, and a quiet endurance that history seldom pauses to notice. In medieval Europe, being a peasant was not simply a job, it was a condition of life. Around 90% of the population lived this way, bound to agricultural labor, limited mobility, and rigid social hierarchies. Most were born into the same role they would die in, with little chance of escape or advancement. Their lives followed patterns set by custom rather than choice, by obligation rather than ambition. Peasant life mattered deeply, even if it was rarely recorded. Without these people, fields would not be planted, taxes would not be collected, armies would not march, and cities would not eat. Their labor formed the invisible foundation of medieval civilization, and yet they lived under constant pressure, from hunger, weather, authority, and the simple reality that survival was never guaranteed. Before we begin, a small note. If you enjoy these calm journeys through history, I upload new videos every day, so consider subscribing and turning on the bell, and tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? I love imagining people drifting off to the same story under different skies. A peasant's day did not begin with inspiration or intention. It began because it had to. Waking hours were dictated by daylight, seasons, and the unspoken understanding that falling behind meant falling into hunger. There were no alarms, no written schedules, only routine shaped by generations before. Homes were simple, often a single room shared by an entire family and their animals. Tools were few, food was limited, and comfort was secondary to survival. Every object had a purpose. Every task carried weight. Even rest was calculated, taken only when the body could no longer continue. From the moment of birth, a peasant belonged somewhere, not symbolically, but legally and economically. Land ownership was rare. Movement was restricted. Obligations were inherited alongside names. A child did not grow up wondering who they might become. That question had already been answered by birth. The land itself was both lifeline and burden. It demanded constant labor while offering no certainty in return. One bad harvest could undo years of effort. One harsh winter could erase entire families. And yet, each year, peasants returned to the fields because there was nowhere else to go. Faith provided structure rather than escape. The church explained suffering, justified hierarchy, and promised justice beyond this life. Endurance became a virtue. Acceptance became wisdom. To question one's place was not just dangerous, it was unthinkable. As the sun rose over fields, worked by generations of the same hands, life continued, not with hope for change, but with commitment to continuity. Peasant misery was not dramatic or sudden. It was slow, repetitive, and deeply woven into everyday existence. This is where our journey begins. Not in palaces or battlefields, but beneath the open sky, where most medieval lives unfolded quietly, persistently, and without record. Part 2. Born without a choice. Inheritance of soil, debt, and silence. The moment a peasant is born, something invisible settles quietly into place. It is not a blessing, and it is not a curse spoken aloud, yet it shapes everything that follows. This child does not arrive as a blank page. They arrive as a continuation of a contract they never signed, bound to land, obligation, and expectation long before they can understand words like duty or freedom. Birth itself is rarely gentle. It happens in the same dim, crowded space where life already unfolds, on packed earth floors, beneath low beams darkened by years of smoke. There is no clean linen, no physician summoned from afar. Instead, there are hands that have delivered many children before, hands worn rough by work and weather. The air smells of sweat, straw, and damp wool. Outside, the world does not pause. Animals still need tending, fields still wait. Life presses forward even as another fragile body enters it. If the child survives the first days, and many do not, that survival is greeted not with celebration, but with relief. Relief is a quieter emotion than joy. It carries caution within it, an awareness that nothing has truly been secured. Infant mortality hangs over every household, like a shadow that never quite leaves. Names are spoken softly at first, as if to avoid drawing attention. Attachment grows slowly, guarded by experience. From the beginning, the child belongs somewhere, not in the abstract sense of family or community, but in the legal and social sense of ownership. In many parts of medieval Europe, peasants are not free to leave the land they are born on. They are serfs, bound to an estate, transferred with it like part of the soil itself. If the land changes hands, so do they. If debts accumulate, they inherit those as well, not written on parchment, but embedded in custom and expectation. This inheritance is not discussed. It does not need to be explained. Everyone knows it. The parents know it. The neighbors know it. The local lord certainly knows it. The child grows into a world where movement is restricted not by walls, but by invisible lines that are never crossed. Roads exist, but they do not lead anywhere the peasant can truly go. Freedom, as a concept, is distant and vague. It belongs to others, to merchants passing through, to clergy who travel between monasteries, to soldiers marching under banners. For the peasant, the horizon is not an invitation. It is a boundary. As the child grows, these limits reveal themselves slowly, through habit rather than instruction. They learn where they may walk and where they should not. They learn which forests are forbidden, which streams require permission to fish from, which paths lead past the manor and must be approached with lowered eyes. Authority is not always enforced through violence. More often, it is enforced through repetition, through the quiet knowledge that stepping beyond one's place brings consequences no one wishes to test. Time itself feels inherited. Days are structured not by choice, but by necessity. Morning arrives whether one is ready or not. Tasks are assigned as naturally as breathing. There is no question of whether a child will help in the fields. It is only a matter of when. Small hands begin with small duties, gathering sticks, chasing birds, carrying water. Each task builds familiarity with labor until work becomes less an activity and more a state of being. Education, in the formal sense, is absent. There are no lessons designed to expand possibility. Knowledge is practical, immediate, and narrowly focused on survival. Children learn by watching, by imitating, by failing, and being corrected. Mistakes are costly. A dropped tool, a missed signal in the fields, a poorly tended animal, these errors ripple outward, affecting everyone. There is little sense that life could be otherwise. Stories of distant cities or different lives exist, but they feel unreal, like tales told to pass long evenings. They do not inspire longing so much as curiosity, quickly tempered by realism. Even if such places exist, they are not meant for people like this. That understanding settles early, shaping ambition into something smaller and safer. The family itself operates less as an emotional unit and more as a system of survival. Affection exists, certainly, but it is expressed quietly, sparingly. Love is shown through effort rather than words, through shared labor, through food divided carefully, through endurance on behalf of others. There is no room for indulgence. Every resource, including emotional energy, must be managed. Marriage, when it comes later, will follow similar logic. It will not be the culmination of choice, but another step in maintaining balance between households, between obligations, between labor needs. Even this future is implicitly understood long before it arrives. Paths are laid down early, and deviation is rare. The presence of the Lord is distant yet constant. Children grow up knowing who holds power, even if they rarely see him directly. The manor stands apart, elevated, constructed of sturdier materials that resist weather and time. It is a visible reminder that hierarchy is physical as well as social. The difference between peasant and lord is not abstract. It is measured in stone walls, in clean water, in protection from hunger during lean years. Obligations are absorbed gradually. A child watches grain carried away as rent, watches livestock counted and claimed, watches adults bow their heads, not always out of respect, but out of habit. These moments teach without instruction. They establish a rhythm of submission that feels natural simply because it has always been there. Faith reinforces this structure gently, persistently. The Church speaks of order, of God's design, of roles assigned for reasons beyond human understanding. To question one's place is not merely impractical, it is dangerous, both socially and spiritually. Obedience becomes a virtue, acceptance becomes a form of wisdom, and yet, beneath this acceptance, there is an undercurrent of quiet awareness. Peasants understand injustice even if they do not name it as such. They know when demands are excessive, when seasons are cruel, when rules bend only one way. This knowledge is shared in glances, in lowered voices, in stories told after dark. It does not lead to rebellion, at least not often, but it prevents complete illusion. The body itself becomes a record of inheritance. Backs stoop early, hands harden, feet grow accustomed to uneven ground. These changes are gradual, almost unnoticed at first, but they accumulate year by year. Childhood slips away not with ceremony, but with responsibility. By the time the peasant reaches adolescence, their path is already narrow and well worn. They are not asked what they wish to become. The question would make little sense. Becoming in this world is less about transformation and more about continuation. You become what you were always expected to be. There is a particular quiet sadness in this lack of choice, not sharp enough to provoke outrage, but deep enough to linger. It is the sadness of knowing that effort does not lead to escape, only to survival. That no matter how diligently one works, the ceiling remains low, the horizon fixed, and yet life goes on, because it must. The absence of choice does not erase the instinct to live. Peasants laugh, argue, dream in small ways. They find meaning where they can, in family, in routine, in fleeting moments of rest. These are not acts of resistance, but of adaptation. As another day settles into evening, the child, no longer so young, returns home with dirt on their hands and fatigue already familiar. The sky darkens, fires are lit, food is shared carefully. Tomorrow will look much like today, and the day after that. This is what it means to be born without a choice, not a single moment of dramatic loss, but a lifetime shaped by limits that feel as natural as the changing seasons. The land holds its people tightly, and from the moment of birth, it does not let go. Part 3. The weight of the land. When the earth owned you back, the land does not greet the peasant with generosity. It waits instead, dark and heavy, silent, in a way that feels expectant rather than peaceful. From a distance, fields may appear calm, wide stretches of soil broken by hedges, stones, and the slow curve of paths worn thin by feet and carts. But up close, the land reveals itself as demanding, unyielding, and endlessly hungry for effort. To work the land in the Middle Ages is not to shape it according to one's will. It is to negotiate with it daily, often unsuccessfully. The soil is rarely ideal. It is thick with clay that clings stubbornly to wooden plows or thin and rocky, forcing crops to struggle for purchase. Stones must be removed by hand, carried away one by one, only to reappear after the next, frost pushes them back to the surface. The earth seems to resist improvement, as though reminding the peasant that it was never meant to be mastered. Each morning begins with the body already tired. Muscles stiffen overnight on straw bedding that offers little support. When the peasant stands, there is a familiar ache in the lower back, a dull tension across shoulders and knees. These sensations are not alarming, they are expected. Pain is not a signal to stop, but a background condition of existence, like hunger or cold. The tools used to work the land are simple and unforgiving. A wooden plow reinforced with iron cuts shallow lines into the soil. It must be guided carefully, pulled by oxen whose pace sets the rhythm of the day. The peasant walks behind, gripping the handles tightly, adjusting for uneven ground, roots, and stones. The vibration travels up through the arms, settling into joints already worn by years of repetition. There is no relief in this motion, only endurance. Weather dictates everything. A dry spring hardens the soil, making plowing nearly impossible. A wet one turns fields into sucking mud that steals boots and strength alike. Rain does not fall evenly or politely. It arrives too early, too late, or not at all. When it comes in excess, it rots seeds in the ground. When it stays away, crops wither silently, their failure unfolding slowly over weeks. The peasant watches the sky constantly. Clouds are studied not for beauty, but for threat and promise. Wind direction matters. Temperature matters. A single unexpected frost can undo months of labor, blackening shoots overnight. There is no recourse when this happens, no insurance, no reserve large enough to soften the blow. Loss is absorbed directly into the body, in less food, in longer days, in anxiety that lingers long after the weather clears. Ownership of the land is an illusion. Though peasants work the fields year after year, often for generations, the land does not belong to them. It belongs to the Lord, to the church, to institutions that exist beyond reach. This reality reshapes effort itself. Improvements made to the soil, clearing stones, enriching fields, building drainage, benefit those above as much as those below. The peasant invests labor into something that can never truly be theirs. This knowledge settles quietly into the psyche. It discourages ambition beyond survival. Why invest more than necessary in land that cannot be claimed? Why dream of abundance when abundance invites increased demands? A good harvest does not mean relief. It often means higher rents, higher expectations, more taken away. Harvest time itself is not celebratory. It is urgent. Fields must be cut quickly, grain gathered before rain, or rot can destroy it. Entire households work from dawn until darkness, hands blistering around sickles, backs bending repeatedly toward the ground. The air fills with dust and chaff that clings to skin and hair, scratches the throat, stings the eyes. There is no pause to admire the yield. Every moment is weighed against the fear of losing it. Once gathered, the harvest does not go directly into storage for the peasant family. Portions are measured and set aside immediately. Rent for the Lord, tithe for the church, seed for next year. What remains is what the family must stretch across months of uncertainty. There is no room for error in these calculations. A single misjudgment can mean hunger before winter's end. The land also demands labor beyond planting and harvesting. Ditches must be cleared, fences repaired, paths maintained, livestock tended alongside crops, each with its own requirements and risks. Animals fall ill, predators strike. Winter fodder must be gathered and stored, adding yet another layer of planning to an already precarious balance. Throughout all of this, the peasant's relationship with the land is deeply physical. Hands are stained permanently with soil, nails crack and split, skin thickens unevenly, hard in some places, raw in others. Cuts and infections are common, treated with whatever remedies are available, often unsuccessfully. The body becomes an extension of the field, worked, depleted, yet expected to endure another season. There is no true separation between labor and identity. To ask who a peasant is to ask what land they work. Fields define reputation, status within the village, even marriage prospects. A well-kept plot reflects diligence and competence. A neglected one invites judgment, suspicion, sometimes punishment. The land watches, and so do neighbors. Yet, despite this harshness, peasants develop an intimate knowledge of the soil that borders on reverence. They know where water collects after heavy rain, where frost lingers longest, where crops struggle, and where they thrive. This knowledge is earned slowly, through failure more often than success. It is not written down. It is carried in memory and habit, passed quietly from parent to child. Still, this intimacy does not translate into control. The land remains unpredictable, its moods shifting beyond comprehension. When famine strikes, it is not perceived as an abstract crisis, but as a betrayal, by the earth itself, by God, by fate. Questions arise, but answers remain elusive. Was the soil exhausted? Were sins committed? Were prayers insufficient? None of these explanations restore lost grain. During years of scarcity, the land becomes an adversary. Fields that once offered sustenance now represent anxiety. Each visit to them is tinged with dread rather than routine. The peasant walks familiar paths with unfamiliar fear, counting stalks, measuring growth, anticipating loss. Even rest is shaped by the land's demands. There is no true off-season. Winter slows agricultural work but introduces new tasks, repairing tools, tending animals, hauling firewood. The land never fully releases its hold. It merely shifts the form of its demands. And through it all, the peasant remains bound, not only legally, but emotionally. Leaving the land is rarely possible, and often unthinkable. The field is hardship, but it is also familiarity. It is the only source of food, the only structure life has ever known. To abandon it would mean stepping into a world even more uncertain. As evening settles and tools are set aside, the land does not fade from thought. It lingers in the body's fatigue, in the mind's quiet calculations. Tomorrow's weather, tomorrow's work, tomorrow's risks. Sleep comes not as relief, but as preparation. The earth, dark and silent under the night sky, waits again. And with the next dawn, it will ask for everything once more: strength, time, health, offering only the possibility, never the promise of survival in return. Part 4. The Lord's Shadow. Living under unseen eyes. The Lord is not always present, yet his presence is never absent. It settles over the village like a long shadow, cast by a building just out of sight, felt more often than seen, shaping movement, speech, and thought, without the need for constant force. For the peasant, power does not arrive dramatically. It is woven quietly into daily life, into customs so old they feel natural, unquestionable. The manor stands apart from the rest of the village. It is usually placed on slightly higher ground, not only for defense, but for visibility. Built of stone or sturdy timber, it resists time and weather in ways peasant homes never can. Its walls do not sag after rain. Its roof does not leak when storms linger. Even from a distance, the contrast is clear. This is a structure meant to last, meant to be seen, meant to remind. Most peasants enter the manor rarely. When they do, it is with lowered eyes and measured steps. The air inside feels different, cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of polished wood, iron, and stored grain. Sounds echo here. Footsteps matter. Voices carry. This is not a space designed for labor, but for authority. The Lord himself may be absent for long periods, attending court, fighting in distant conflicts, or managing other estates. His absence changes nothing. Authority does not require constant presence. It operates through stewards, bailiffs, and reeves, men appointed to enforce obligations, collect dues, and maintain order. These figures are more visible, more immediate, and often more feared than the Lord they serve. Encounters with these representatives are tense but restrained. Orders are delivered without explanation. Questions are discouraged. Resistance, even subtle, carries risk. A missed payment, a delayed service, a perceived slight, any of these can escalate quickly. Punishments are rarely excessive, but they are public enough to be instructive. Shame is an efficient tool. Obligations define the peasant's relationship with the Lord more than personal interaction ever could. These obligations are numerous and varied. Days of labor owed on the Lord's land, portions of harvest surrendered, fees paid for using mills, ovens, and presses. Even basic acts, grinding grain, baking bread, often require permission and payment. Nothing is entirely free. These demands are not negotiated annually. They are fixed by custom, inherited like the land itself. Peasants know what is expected of them long before the steward arrives to collect. Anticipation becomes part of daily calculation. How much grain must be set aside? How many days will be lost to corvée labor this season? Each obligation narrows the margin for survival. The burden is not always evenly distributed. Some peasants hold slightly better arrangements, lighter dues, more secure plots, often due to old agreements or favor. Others struggle under heavier demands. This imbalance fosters quiet tension within the village. Envy is present, but it rarely erupts. Open conflict would only invite scrutiny from above, and scrutiny benefits no one below. Protection is the unspoken justification for this system. The Lord provides defense, armed men, fortified walls, a measure of stability in an uncertain world. When raiders pass nearby or conflicts threaten the region, peasants look toward the manor with cautious hope. In times of danger, its walls may offer refuge, though even this is not guaranteed. Protection is promised more than it is delivered. Justice, too, flows downward from the Lord. Disputes between peasants are settled in manorial courts, presided over by the Lord or his representatives. These courts operate less on principle than on precedent. Outcomes are predictable, favoring authority and continuity over fairness. To win a case against the Lord is almost unthinkable. To lose one is common and accepted. The law is not abstract here. It is personal, localized, shaped by relationships and power. Punishments range from fines to forced labor, occasionally escalating to physical penalties. The goal is not cruelty, but compliance. A disciplined village is a productive village. Living under this system reshapes behavior subtly but profoundly. Speech becomes careful. Complaints are shared quietly, often indirectly. Peasants learn to read moods, to sense when enforcement will be strict and when it may relax. This skill, navigating authority without provoking it, is learned early and practiced constantly. Children absorb these lessons without formal instruction. They watch adults bow slightly when passing the steward. They learn which paths lead too close to the manor. They understand that some names are spoken softly, others not at all. Authority becomes part of the landscape, as fixed and unavoidable as the fields themselves. Fear exists, but it is rarely sharp. It is a dull, persistent awareness of vulnerability. The knowledge that livelihoods depend not only on weather and labor, but on decisions made elsewhere, by people whose lives look nothing like theirs. This uncertainty seeps into thought, discouraging risk, innovation, and open expression. Yet the relationship between peasant and lord is not purely antagonistic. It is complex, bound by mutual dependence. The lord requires labor and loyalty. The peasants require land and a degree of stability. When either side fails too severely, the system strains. This tension produces moments of negotiation, subtle adjustments made quietly to prevent collapse. In rare cases, a lord may be lenient, reducing demands during famine or crisis. Such acts are remembered long after, spoken of with cautious gratitude. More often, demands remain unchanged, even as conditions worsen, Custom, once established, resists compassion. The Lord's shadow extends beyond economics and law. It shapes identity. To be a peasant is not merely to work the land, but to exist within this hierarchy. One's place is known, reinforced daily through gesture and routine. Aspiration is constrained not by lack of imagination, but by realism. To imagine oneself outside this structure feels less like hope and more like fantasy. At night, as the village settles into darkness, the manor remains visible in silhouette. Its outline against the sky is a reminder that power does not sleep when others do. Even in rest, the peasant carries an awareness of being watched, not literally, but structurally. Surveillance is embedded in expectation. This constant presence produces a particular kind of endurance. Peasants learn not to challenge the shadow, but to live within it, adjusting posture and pace accordingly. They develop patience, caution, and a deep understanding of limits. The Lord's power is rarely absolute, yet it is always sufficient to shape lives, to redirect effort, to claim the fruits of labor. It does not need to be visible every day to be effective. Its influence is felt in choices not made, in paths not taken. As another day ends, the peasant returns home, aware that tomorrow's labor will serve many masters: the land, the season, the family, and always, in some measure, the unseen figure whose authority stretches quietly across every field. Part 5. A year measured in hunger, seasonal time, and empty months. Time, for the peasant, does not move forward in neat lines. It circles, it returns, it presses and releases in a rhythm dictated almost entirely by the seasons. There is no sense of progress here, no feeling that one year builds meaningfully upon the last. Instead, life is measured in repetitions, each cycle familiar, each one carrying the same risks, the same fragile hopes. The year does not begin in January. It begins when the ground allows it to begin, when frost loosens its grip just enough for tools to bite into soil, when daylight stretches a little longer into the evening, when the body senses that it must prepare itself once again for months of effort. Spring arrives quietly, without celebration. It is not welcomed with joy, only with readiness. Planting season is tense rather than hopeful. Seeds are precious. Each one placed into the earth represents a calculation, a wager made against weather, disease, and chance. There is no abundance of seed. What is sown cannot be eaten. What is eaten cannot be sown. This balance weighs heavily on every decision, turning simple acts into moments of consequence. The fields are worked with urgency. Delays are dangerous. Too much rain rots seed before it can take hold. Too little leaves it dormant and useless. The peasant moves steadily, often silently, aware that mistakes now will echo months later when there is no way to correct them. Spring does not feel gentle. It feels narrow, unforgiving. As summer settles in, work intensifies. Days stretch longer, and so do hours spent in the fields. The sun bears down relentlessly, drawing sweat and energy alike. There is little shade. Rest is brief and functional, just enough to keep the body moving. Meals are simple, often eaten where one stands, hands still smelling of soil and plant sap. Summer is deceptive. Fields look green, alive, promising. To an outsider, this may seem like a time of plenty. For the peasant, it is a time of waiting and restraint. Crops cannot be touched yet. Granaries remain carefully guarded. Stores from the previous harvest grow thinner by the day. This period is known, quietly and with dread, as the hungry time. The gap between last year's harvest and the next stretches longest here. Food is rationed carefully. Portions shrink subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. Bread grows coarser. Meals lose variety. Hunger does not arrive suddenly. It seeps in slowly, becoming a constant companion rather than an emergency. Children feel it first. Their growth falters. Energy fades. Adults notice and respond not with alarm, but with quiet adjustment. less for themselves, more for those who cannot endure it as easily. Hunger becomes a shared burden, redistributed silently within the household. Autumn brings both relief and pressure. Harvest season arrives with urgency sharpened by fear. This is the narrow window where everything must be gathered and secured before weather or disaster intervenes. Work becomes frantic. Entire families labor from dawn until nightfall, hands blistering, backs bending, again and again. The air fills with the dry scent of cut grain, with dust that coats skin and lungs alike. Sounds carry differently now. The scrape of sickles, the low calls between workers, the steady rustle of stalks being bundled and hauled away. There is no celebration in this noise, only concentration. When harvest finally ends, relief is cautious. Grain is measured, sorted, stored. Obligations are met first. Rent, tithe, dues claimed without delay. Only then does the peasant know what truly remains. The future narrows to a number of sacks, a count of days they must somehow sustain. Winter arrives not as an enemy, but as a test. The land rests, but the peasant does not. Cold settles into bones and dwellings alike. Fires are kept small to conserve fuel. Darkness stretches longer, pressing inward on both time and spirit. Food is now entirely dependent on earlier success. There is no correction, no second chance. Meals are repetitive and sparse. Hunger sharpens, then dulls into something quieter, something almost familiar. It no longer demands attention constantly. It hums in the background, shaping thought and mood. And illness thrives in winter. Bodies weakened by months of labor and reduced nourishment struggle to resist infection. A simple cough can linger, deepen, turn dangerous. Care is limited. Remedies are improvised. Recovery is uncertain. Time slows in winter, not because there is less to do, but because everything takes more effort. Movement is heavier. Cold stiffens joints and fingers. Nights feel endless. The mind drifts more easily, sometimes toward memory, sometimes toward worry. Spring will return. It always does. But its arrival does not erase the toll of the past year. Each cycle leaves marks on bodies, on relationships, on expectations. The peasant ages not by birthdays, but by winters endured, by hungry months survived. This circular time offers no narrative of improvement. A good year does not guarantee the next will be kind. A bad one can echo forward, compounding difficulty. Stability is fragile, easily disrupted by forces beyond control. Yet within this rhythm, peasants find a kind of grim expertise. They learn to anticipate scarcity, to prepare emotionally as well as materially. Hope is measured, cautious, shaped to fit reality. It does not imagine abundance, only sufficiency. The year ends not with reflection, but with endurance. Another cycle completed, another survived. Hunger loosens its grip briefly, only to promise its return. Time moves forward by circling back, and the peasant moves with it, bound to a calendar written not in dates, but in need. Part 6. Bread made of anything. What peasants actually ate, food, for the medieval peasant, is not a source of pleasure or variety. It is a calculation, a strategy, a quiet negotiation between what the body needs and what the world allows. Meals are not planned for enjoyment, but for endurance, shaped by scarcity more than taste, by necessity more than tradition. Bread sits at the center of peasant life, but it is rarely the bread imagined later in stories or paintings. It is not soft, white, or fragrant with abundance. It is dark, dense, and often coarse, made from whatever grain can be spared. Wheat, when available, is a luxury. More often, bread is made from barley, rye, oats, or mixtures of all three. In difficult years, even these are stretched thin. Flour is rarely pure. It contains husks, grit from millstones, sometimes traces of whatever else was mixed in to extend the supply. Over time, this grit wears down teeth, leaving many peasants with aching mouths long before old age. Eating itself becomes uncomfortable, yet unavoidable. When grain is scarce, bread becomes something else entirely. Ground peas, beans, chestnuts, acorns, anything that can be dried, crushed, and mixed into dough finds its way in. In the worst years, bark scraped from trees is added, lending bulk without nourishment. These loaves are heavy and bitter, but they fill space in the stomach, quieting hunger just enough to continue working. Meals are repetitive. Breakfast, when it exists at all, is often leftover bread softened in water or thin ale. Midday meals are brief, taken in the fields when possible, eaten with hands still dirty from labor. Evening meals are the most substantial, but even these are modest. Pottage simmered slowly over a low fire, thickened with whatever vegetables or grains remain. Pottage is less a recipe than a method. A pot hangs over the hearth constantly, its contents evolving over days. Whatever is available is added. Onions, leeks, cabbage, turnips, herbs gathered from hedgerows. Meat appears rarely, usually in small quantities, stretched across many mouths. When an animal is slaughtered, nothing is wasted. Fat is rendered, bones boiled, scraps preserved as best they can be. Protein comes inconsistently. Eggs are valuable and often reserved. Milk is seasonal and more likely to be turned into cheese, which keeps longer. Fish may be available near rivers or coasts, but access is often restricted by law. Hunting game is forbidden to peasants in many regions, punishable by fines or worse. Forests that once sustained communities now belong to lords, and their bounty is protected. Hunger shapes taste itself. Flavors are muted, familiar, predictable. Spices are rare and expensive, associated with the tables of the wealthy. Salt, though more common, is still valuable and used carefully. Sweetness comes mostly from honey, when it can be spared, or from fruit gathered in season and preserved when possible. Preservation is an ongoing challenge. Without reliable storage, food spoils easily. Smoke, drying, salting, all are used, but none are foolproof. Mold claims bread, meat turns, grain attracts pests. Each loss tightens the margin further, increasing anxiety as winter approaches. Children grow accustomed to this diet early. Their palates know no alternative. Cravings are not indulged, they are learned away. Adults remember flavors from better years, but memory offers little comfort. Eating becomes functional, stripped of ceremony. Illness and malnutrition are closely linked. Diets heavy in grain, but low in variety, weaken bodies over time. Deficiencies manifest slowly in fatigue, in fragile bones, in susceptibility to disease. These conditions are not understood medically. They are accepted as part of life. Weakness is blamed on fate, on God's will, on personal failing. Food distribution within the household reflects quiet hierarchies. Working adults receive priority, their labor essential to survival. Children and the elderly adjust to less. These decisions are rarely discussed. They are made instinctively, painfully, guided by necessity rather than fairness. Feast days interrupt this monotony briefly. Religious festivals bring communal meals, shared bread, perhaps a little more meat or ale than usual. These moments are anticipated eagerly, not for indulgence, but for difference. For once, the pot tastes fuller. For once, hunger loosens its grip. Yet, even these feasts carry reminders of scarcity. Portions are controlled. Leftovers are saved carefully. Celebration does not erase awareness. It heightens it. The contrast makes return to routine more difficult. Alcohol plays a subtle role. Ale is safer to drink than water in many places, brewed weekly and consumed daily. It provides calories and mild comfort, a softening of edges at the end of long days. Drunkenness is rare. The supply does not allow it. Instead, ale becomes another form of sustenance, another way to stretch limited resources. The act of eating itself is quiet. There are no separate dishes, no elaborate settings. Food is shared from common bowls, eaten with fingers or simple utensils. Conversation is minimal, energy conserved. Meals are moments of pause, not social performance. Over time, hunger reshapes priorities. Thoughts circle back to food repeatedly. What remains, how long it will last, what can be gathered next. Planning becomes constant, subconscious. Even in moments of rest, calculations continue. This diet does more than sustain bodies. It shapes worldviews. When survival depends on so little, excess appears wasteful, even immoral. The idea of abundance becomes abstract, associated with others, with those who live differently. For the peasant, enough is a narrow band between starvation and survival, and life unfolds entirely within it. As night settles and the hearth dims, the pot is scraped clean. The smell of cooked grain lingers in the air, mingling with smoke and ash. Stomachs are not full, but they are quiet enough. Tomorrow's food already exists only as possibility, as hope tied to weather, labor, and luck. Bread, in this world, is never just bread. It is time, effort, fear, and endurance pressed together into something barely sufficient and endlessly necessary. Part 7. Bodies that never rest. Work without an end. To be a peasant in the Middle Ages is to never truly rest. The rhythm of life is dictated by the unrelenting demands of survival, and sleep itself becomes a luxury, often interrupted and rarely refreshing. The human body, shaped by years of labor, learns to adapt to exhaustion, yet it never becomes immune to its toll. Each day begins before the light has fully filled the sky. The peasant rises not because they feel rested, but because there is simply no choice. The work that begins with the first light must continue until the last rays fade into evening and sometimes beyond. The body is expected to work with the land, to become an extension of the tools used to shape it. There is no other option. For the children, the pattern begins early. Even as young as 5 or 6, they are expected to take on small tasks, gathering sticks for the fire, chasing birds from crops, helping with small animals. These tasks are considered training for adulthood, preparation for the moment when they too will be able to hold the plow or wield a sickle. The weight of responsibility presses upon them even before they understand its significance. Childhood, in the traditional sense, barely exists. It is not so much a period of development as a brief pause before work begins in earnest. For the adults, the pattern is more entrenched. The work they do is both physical and unceasing, demanding every ounce of energy their bodies can muster. In the morning, before the sun has fully risen, they are already at the fields, plowing, planting, sowing, repairing the fences, gathering firewood. There is no sense of gradual build-up. There is no moment to adjust to the day. From the moment their feet touch the ground, they are immersed in a relentless cycle of tasks. The nature of peasant labor is repetitive. The tools used are simple, but unforgiving. The plow is a blunt instrument pulled by oxen, its wooden frame clumsy against the earth. The sickle used for harvesting grain is sharp, but it demands precision and effort. The labor does not change with the seasons. It remains constant, the same motions repeated over and over again. Each day feels like the one before, with no reprieve, no variation. There are moments of rest, of course, but they are brief and dictated by necessity. The only time the body is allowed to pause is when it cannot continue any longer, when the sun has dipped below the horizon, when the muscles ache too much to lift another load, when hunger becomes unbearable and the body simply gives in to exhaustion. Even then, rest is not restful. It is a pause, a moment to regain just enough energy to begin again. The body does not know true relaxation. It knows only the rhythm of effort and weariness. At night, when the labor of the day is done, the peasant sleeps, but the sleep is never deep. It is interrupted by the sounds of the world, the wind, the animals shifting in their pens, the occasional creak of the roof as the building settles. The peasant's body has learned to sleep with one eye open, to remain alert even in rest. for tomorrow's tasks will come with the same weight. The body of a peasant is not just shaped by the work they do, it is shaped by the conditions under which they do it. The physical demands are compounded by the environment, which provides no comfort or relief. The weather is not their ally. Winter brings bitter cold, forcing the peasant to work in frostbite-inducing conditions, to carry firewood back to their homes with numb hands. Summer brings the opposite, with heat that drains the strength from limbs already overworked. The body is constantly exposed to the elements, with no reprieve, no refuge from their demands. Over time, the body begins to reflect the years of labor it has endured. The hands, once smooth and young, are now thickened and calloused, worn down by the repetitive motions of working with rough tools. The back hunches under the weight of years spent bending over crops, stooping to gather, to sow, to tend. The joints ache, the knees creak under the strain of lifting, carrying, pulling. Despite the toll it takes, the peasant's body continues, driven by necessity. There is no time to consider the consequences of overwork. There is no luxury of stepping back to rest, to allow the body to recover. Recovery is a luxury that does not exist for the peasant. Illness, injury, fatigue, they are simply part of the landscape. The body adapts, and when it can no longer keep up, it succumbs. There are no doctors. There are no hospitals. The body, in this world, must heal itself or not at all. The remedies that are available are crude, based on herbs and folk wisdom passed down through generations. A sprain is wrapped in cloth, a sore throat soothed with honey. Infections are treated with poultices of mud or plants, applied by hands that are no cleaner than the soil they work with. There is little in the way of real medical knowledge. Sickness is an inconvenience, not a tragedy, and it is dealt with by simply enduring it. When a peasant becomes too ill to work, it is a serious matter. Work does not wait, and there is always more to do. The village will not stop to accommodate an individual's needs. To fall ill is to risk survival, not just for oneself, but for the entire family. It means less work done, fewer hands to carry the load, fewer mouths to fill with what little food remains. The body becomes a machine, and when that machine fails, it is often repaired as quickly and roughly as possible until it is strong enough to return to its labor. Despite the toll on the body, peasants are not passive in their suffering. They do not simply endure, they adapt. They find ways to continue. They push through pain, weariness, and injury because they must. They understand the necessity of their labor. It is the foundation of their survival and the survival of their communities. And yet, beneath this endurance, there is a weariness that cannot be hidden. It is felt in the way the peasant moves, in the way they carry themselves. They are not defeated, but they are worn. Their bodies are slowly eroded by time and labor, their strength sapped by the continuous demand for more. Even in moments of rest, even in the rare instances when the peasant's body is allowed to pause, the knowledge of future work never leaves. There is no true peace for the peasant. The body is constantly on alert, always preparing for the next round of labor. Each day is a repetition of the last, each motion a reflection of years of continuous effort. And as the sun sets, the peasant's body, worn but not broken, prepares for another cycle, another day of work, another day of survival. The fatigue is constant, but so is the will to continue. Part 8. Homes of smoke and straw, shelter without comfort. A peasant. S home is not a refuge from the world so much as a thin barrier against it. It stands between the body and the elements, offering just enough protection to survive, never enough to feel secure. These dwellings are shaped by necessity and scarcity, not by design or comfort. Every beam, every wall, every patch of thatch reflects what could be gathered, borrowed, or reused, rather than what was chosen. Most peasant homes are built low to the ground, their outlines blending into the surrounding earth. Walls are made from wattle and daub, woven sticks packed with mud, straw, and animal dung, or from rough stone gathered nearby. These materials insulate poorly. In winter, cold creeps in slowly but relentlessly. In summer, heat settles and lingers, trapped within thick, airless spaces. The house responds to weather as much as it resists it. The roof, usually thatched with straw or reeds, requires constant maintenance. Rain seeps through when the thatch thins. Wind lifts edges and pulls at weak spots. Moss and insects settle easily. Repair is a regular task, not an occasional one, and it is done with whatever is at hand. A neglected roof is not merely inconvenient, it is dangerous, threatening to collapse under snow or rot under persistent damp. Inside, there is rarely more than one room. This single space serves as kitchen, bedroom, workspace, and shelter for animals. Boundaries are implied rather than constructed. There are no separate chambers for privacy or quiet. Life unfolds openly, every sound and smell shared by all who live there. The hearth sits at the center, both physically and symbolically. It provides heat, light, and a place to cook. Smoke rises constantly, but chimneys are rare or poorly constructed. Much of the smoke lingers inside, drifting upward to blacken beams and settle in lungs. Eyes sting. Breathing becomes labored over time. Coughs are common, accepted as part of life rather than signs of danger. Furniture is minimal. A rough table, perhaps a bench or stool, beds made of straw laid directly on the floor or raised slightly on wooden frames. These beds offer little support. Straw shifts and compresses, becoming lumpy and damp, attracting insects. Fleas and lice are constant companions, moving easily between bedding, clothing, and skin. Sleep is light, interrupted by itching and movement. Cleanliness, as later centuries would define it, is unattainable. Water must be carried from wells or streams, making frequent washing impractical. Clothing is worn repeatedly before being cleaned, often rinsed in cold water without soap. The smell of smoke, sweat, animals, and earth permeates everything. It becomes so familiar that it fades into the background, noticed only when something changes. Animals share the home not out of sentiment, but survival. A goat, a pig, a few chickens. These creatures provide milk, meat, eggs, or income, and their presence offers warmth during cold months. Their sounds fill the space, shifting hooves, soft grunts, the rustle of feathers. Waste must be managed carefully, removed when possible, but some remains unavoidable. Disease spreads easily in such close quarters. Light is scarce. Windows are small, if they exist at all, covered with oiled cloth or left open to the air. Daylight filters in weakly, leaving corners in shadow even at noon. At night, light comes from the hearth or from small tallow candles, expensive and used sparingly. Darkness dominates much of the interior, shaping routines and limiting activity. The house offers little protection from noise. Wind whistles through cracks. Rain drums loudly on the roof. In storms, the entire structure seems to shudder, reminding its inhabitants how temporary their shelter truly is. During harsh weather, fear settles quietly, fear that the roof will fail, that walls will give way, that the elements will claim what little stands between the family and exposure. Privacy does not exist in any meaningful sense. Conversations are overheard. Arguments unfold in full view. Illness, grief, and exhaustion are shared experiences. This closeness fosters a certain intimacy, but also tension. There is nowhere to retreat, nowhere to be alone with one's thoughts. Silence is rare, and solitude rarer still. Children grow up quickly in such spaces. They learn to navigate around tools, animals, and fire from an early age. Danger is constant but normalized. Burns, cuts, and bruises are common. Supervision is limited, not from neglect, but from necessity. Adults are busy, and the environment demands awareness rather than protection. Despite all this, the peasant home holds meaning. It is the center of family life, the place where meals are shared, where stories are told quietly after long days, where small moments of warmth are created against the odds. These moments matter deeply, precisely because the setting offers so little comfort. Repairs are continuous, walls crack and must be patched, floors erode and must be leveled again. Nothing stays finished for long. Maintenance is woven into daily life, another layer of labor added to already full days. Neglect is not an option, but perfection is impossible. The home also reflects social status. Its condition is visible to neighbors and to authorities. A well-maintained house suggests diligence and reliability. A falling one invites judgment, sometimes intervention. Even shelter becomes a measure of worth. When illness strikes, the limitations of the home become more severe. Damp air worsens breathing. Cold weakens already strained bodies. Care must be given in the same cramped space where daily life continues. There is no isolation, no comfort beyond what family can provide. At night, as the fire dies down, the home grows colder. Shadows deepen, sounds from outside, animals, wind, distant movement, filter in. The family settles into sleep, bodies close for warmth, wrapped in coarse blankets. Rest comes not because conditions are ideal, but because exhaustion leaves no alternative. The peasant home does not promise safety, comfort, or peace. It promises only continuity, a place to return to after labor, a shelter that endures just long enough. It is not a sanctuary from hardship, but a container for it, holding together lives shaped by endurance rather than ease. As the fire fades to embers and smoke thins, the house remains standing, fragile yet persistent, much like the people within it. Part 9. Dirt, Disease, and Early Death. When sickness was ordinary, illness in the medieval peasant's world is not an interruption. It is a condition of life, as expected and unremarkable as rain or cold. Disease does not arrive as a sudden crisis that demands explanation. It drifts through villages quietly, settling into bodies already weakened by hunger, labor, and exposure. Sickness is familiar, death even more so. Cleanliness, as a concept tied to health, barely exists. Water must be carried by hand, often from shared sources that serve both people and animals. Streams used for drinking are the same ones used for washing clothes, cleaning tools, and disposing of waste. Contamination is constant, though unrecognized. The connection between filth and illness is not understood in any systematic way. When sickness comes, it is attributed to fate, divine will, bad air, or imbalance within the body. The ground itself is a source of danger. Floors are made of packed earth, damp and uneven, absorbing waste and moisture alike. Bare feet step where animals have stood, where refuse has been dropped, where insects thrive unseen. Cuts and scrapes are inevitable. Infection follows easily, turning minor wounds into serious threats. There is no antiseptic, no reliable treatment. Healing depends on luck as much as care. Children suffer the most. Their bodies are small, still growing, already compromised by poor nutrition. Fevers claim them quickly. Diarrhea, so common it barely earns comment, dehydrates them beyond recovery. Many do not survive their first years, and this loss, while painful, is not shocking. Parents grieve quietly, because grief must coexist with survival. Fields still need tending. Other children still need feeding. Those who live past childhood are not safe. Disease respects no age, only vulnerability. Respiratory illnesses spread easily in smoke-filled homes. Coughs linger for weeks, deepening with each cold night. Tuberculosis, though unnamed, wastes bodies slowly, drawing strength away over months or years. Skin diseases flourish where washing is rare and insects constant. Medical care, such as it exists, is limited and unreliable. Physicians serve the wealthy, not the peasantry. What care peasants receive comes from local healers, midwives, or monks, drawing on tradition rather than science. Herbs are gathered, poultices applied, prayers spoken. Some treatments help by chance, others worsen conditions. None offer certainty. Bloodletting, believed to restore balance, weakens already frail bodies. Superstitions guide treatment as much as observation. Illness is as much a spiritual problem as a physical one. Confession may be prescribed alongside remedies, repentance offered in hope of recovery. When healing does not come, the failure is explained through sin or divine testing. Pain is managed poorly. There are no effective analgesics. Toothaches can be unbearable, yet extraction is crude and dangerous. Broken bones are set imperfectly, if at all, leaving permanent disability. A peasant injured in the fields may never fully recover, yet work cannot stop. The body adapts by compensating, redistributing strain until something else gives way. Plagues, when they arrive, are devastating precisely because everyday health is already so fragile. When epidemic disease sweeps through a region, peasants have little defense. Crowded living conditions, shared tools, and communal work accelerate spread. Entire families fall ill together. Villages empty quietly, not with drama, but with absence. Death is constant enough to be unremarkable, yet never truly distant. It shapes behavior subtly. Plans are modest, futures are short. There is little assumption of long life. To reach old age is rare and noteworthy, often accompanied by chronic pain and disability. Longevity is not celebrated as achievement, it is endured. Burial practices are simple. Graves are shallow. Markers, if present at all, are temporary. Names fade quickly. Memory survives only in stories, and even those erode with time. Life moves on because it must, even when loss accumulates. Fear of disease does not manifest as panic. It manifests as resignation. Peasants accept sickness as part of existence, not as something to be prevented, but as something to be survived if possible. This acceptance is not ignorance alone, it is adaptation. When control is impossible, expectation adjusts. Women face particular dangers. Childbirth is among the greatest risks they encounter. Without medical intervention, complications are often fatal. Midwives do what they can, relying on experience and instinct. Some women survive many births, others do not survive even one. Pregnancy carries both hope and fear, held together uneasily. Men, too, are vulnerable. Heavy labor strains hearts and lungs. Accidents with tools are common. A single misstep can lead to infection, disability, or death. There is no safety net. An injured worker is a liability not only to himself, but to his family. Illness also carries social consequences. A sick peasant cannot fulfill obligations. Dues do not disappear because of fever. Fields do not tend themselves. When sickness lingers, families slide closer to desperation. Community support exists, but it is limited by shared scarcity. Everyone is vulnerable. Few can afford generosity for long. Yet within this harsh reality, care still exists. Families tend the sick as best they can. Water is brought. Fires are kept burning. Food is shared when possible. These acts are small, quiet, and deeply human. They do not often change outcomes, but they matter nonetheless. The constant presence of death shapes a particular worldview. Life is fragile, yes, but it is also persistent. People learn to live fully within narrow margins, to value moments of health without expecting permanence. Joy, when it appears, is tempered by awareness. As sickness passes through and moves on, leaving survivors and graves behind, the village adjusts. Empty houses are reclaimed. Fields are redistributed. The rhythm of work resumes. There is no time for prolonged mourning. Memory settles into the background, carried silently. For the peasant, disease is not an anomaly. It is part of the environment, like weather or soil quality. It cannot be escaped, only endured. Bodies are fragile tools, expected to perform under conditions that steadily wear them down. And so life continues, precarious and brief, shaped by the understanding that each day of health is provisional and that survival itself is never guaranteed, only attempted again and again until it is no longer possible. Part 10. Faith as explanation, not escape religion, in a peasant's life. Faith does not lift the peasant out of suffering. It settles into it. It wraps itself around hardship not to remove it, but to explain why it must be endured. Religion in the medieval peasant's world is not primarily a source of comfort or transcendence. It is a framework, a way of understanding pain, inequality, hunger, and loss in a world where none of these can be avoided. The church is often the most solid building a peasant ever enters. Built of stone, cool even in summer, it stands apart from homes of mud and straw. Its walls feel permanent, its presence steady. For a peasant accustomed to fragile structures and uncertain futures, this solidity matters. It suggests order in a world that otherwise feels precarious. Church bells shape time more reliably than any calendar. They call villagers to prayer, mark feast days, announce deaths. Their sound carries across fields and paths, reaching even those bent over work. The bells do not ask whether one is tired or busy. They simply ring, reminding everyone that another rhythm exists alongside labor, a rhythm tied to heaven rather than soil. Attendance is not optional. Faith is communal, enforced as much by expectation as by belief. To miss Mass repeatedly invites suspicion. Absence suggests disorder, perhaps even rebellion, not only against God, but against the social structure that depends on shared obedience. Participation reinforces belonging, even when belief itself wavers. Inside the church, the air smells different. Incense hangs faintly, mixing with cold stone and old wood. Light filters through small windows, softened and muted. For a brief time, the peasant is not in the fields or the home. The body still aches, hunger still presses, but attention shifts. Words are spoken in Latin, often incomprehensible, yet their tone carries authority. Meaning is conveyed through ritual more than explanation. Sermons emphasize order. God has placed each person where they belong. Lords rule by divine right. Peasants labor as part of God's plan. Suffering is framed as a test, a purification, a preparation for eternal reward. Heaven becomes the place where imbalance is corrected. Not here, not now, but later, much later. This promise does not erase hardship. It makes it bearable by giving it shape. Pain without explanation breeds anger. Pain with explanation becomes something to endure. Faith turns endurance into virtue. To suffer quietly is not weakness. It is righteousness. Sin is woven into everyday understanding of misfortune. A failed crop, an illness, a sudden death. These are not random events. They are signs. Something has gone wrong in the moral order. The response is not investigation but repentance. Confession, prayer, fasting. These are tools peasants use to regain a sense of control when physical control is impossible. Fear plays a role here, but it is not always loud. It is a quiet awareness that God watches constantly, weighing actions and thoughts alike. This surveillance mirrors earthly authority. Just as the Lord's shadow stretches over the fields, so too does divine judgment stretch over the soul. Obedience is rewarded, disobedience punished. If not now, then later. The church also regulates joy. Feast days punctuate the year, offering sanctioned relief from routine. These moments matter deeply. Music, shared meals, processions, they break monotony, offering brightness without challenging order. Celebration is allowed, but only within prescribed limits. Saints play an important role in peasant spirituality. They are intermediaries, figures closer, more approachable than distant theological concepts. A saint understands illness, hunger, fear. Candles are lit, small offerings are made, prayers are specific, practical, for rain, for health, for protection. Faith here is not abstract. It is grounded in daily need. Women often engage deeply with devotional practices. They pray for children, for safe births, for the return of husbands from labor or conflict. Their faith is intimate, repetitive, woven into domestic routines. These prayers do not always change outcomes, but they offer structure to fear. Men engage differently, though no less sincerely. Faith supports endurance. It offers justification for effort that seems endless and unrewarded. To work hard, to obey, to accept one's lot. These are framed as moral achievements. Strength is spiritual as well as physical. Doubt exists, but it rarely surfaces openly. Questioning God's plan risks social and spiritual consequences. Doubt is managed quietly, suppressed rather than explored. It may emerge in private moments, in whispered complaints, in fatigue rather than argument. Faith persists not because it is always convincing, but because alternatives are dangerous. The Church also serves practical functions. It records marriages, legitimizes unions, marks births and deaths. It provides limited charity, especially during crises, though resources are often thin. Monasteries may offer aid, but demand obedience in return. Help is conditional, never free of expectation. Education, when available at all, flows through the Church. Literacy is rare among peasants. Scripture is heard, not read. Interpretation is controlled. This reinforces dependence. Knowledge remains centralized, authority unchallenged. Religion shapes morality in subtle ways. Honesty, humility, patience. These are virtues praised because they support social stability. Anger, ambition, resistance. These are condemned not only as sinful, but as disruptive. Faith aligns personal behavior with communal survival. Death is framed through religious meaning. Funerals emphasize the soul's journey rather than the body's loss. Grief is permitted, but moderated by doctrine. Excessive mourning suggests lack of faith. The dead are entrusted to God, and the living are reminded to continue. This spiritual framework offers comfort, but it also limits imagination. It teaches peasants not to expect justice here, not to seek change too boldly. Hope is redirected away from the present world and toward the next. This redirection stabilizes society, even as it constrains it. And yet faith is not merely imposed. Peasants believe sincerely, deeply, often passionately. Religion offers language for emotions otherwise unmanageable. It turns chaos into narrative, suffering into story. In a life marked by uncertainty, faith provides coherence. At night, prayers close the day. Words spoken softly before sleep acknowledge fear, ask for protection, offer thanks for survival. These moments are quiet, personal, rarely observed. They reflect a faith lived not in triumph, but in persistence. Faith does not free the peasant from misery. It teaches them how to live within it. It does not promise escape from hardship, only meaning within it. And for many, that meaning is enough to endure another day beneath the open sky, another season measured not in hope, but in survival. Part 11. Taxes you couldn't refuse. The many ways food disappeared, nothing a peasant produces is ever entirely theirs. From the moment grain breaks the soil to the moment bread is lifted from the hearth, claims are already laid upon it. These claims are old, unquestioned, and relentless. They do not announce themselves with violence. They arrive quietly, through custom and expectation, and they leave behind absence, emptied sacks, shortened meals, narrowed futures. The first claim is the land itself. Rent is owed not as a single payment, but as a series of obligations woven throughout the year. Some are predictable, measured portions of grain, fixed days of labor. Others appear as needs arise, repairs to the manor, additional work during harvest, contributions demanded when the Lord's household expands or his ambitions grow. These demands are rarely explained. They do not need to be. Custom speaks louder than justification. Grain is the most visible loss. After harvest, before the peasant family has fully assessed its own needs, sacks are set aside. The best portion often goes first. This is not cruelty so much as logic from above. The Lord's household must be sustained, his stores filled against future uncertainty. What remains for the peasant is what remains, no more, no less. Beyond rent lies the tithe. 1/10 of produce owed to the church, claimed as God's due. This obligation carries spiritual weight, making refusal not merely unlawful, but sinful. Grain, livestock, even garden produce may be counted. The tithe is collected with formality, recorded carefully, reinforcing its legitimacy. To question it is to question order itself. Fees extend into daily activities. The mill, often owned by the Lord, must be used for grinding grain. A portion of flour is kept as payment. The communal oven, similarly controlled, takes its share. Even simple acts, turning grain into bread, are taxed, each step extracting a little more from already thin margins. These losses accumulate invisibly. No single payment ruins a household. Instead, they erode stability slowly, like water seeping through stone. Peasants plan not around abundance, but around subtraction. How much will be taken? What will remain? Can it last through winter? Money, when it exists, complicates matters further. Coin is scarce, yet certain obligations demand it. Fines, special levies, occasional taxes imposed to fund wars or ceremonies. These require peasants to sell goods or labor to acquire currency. Selling food to pay taxes creates a cruel paradox: sustenance exchanged for survival. The timing of these demands matters as much as their size. Collections often occur when supplies are lowest, increasing strain. A poor harvest does not always reduce obligations proportionally. Custom resists flexibility. Mercy, when shown, is remembered precisely because it is rare. Enforcement is methodical. Stewards keep records. Missed payments are noted. Penalties follow predictably. Additional labor, fines, loss of privileges. Rarely is force needed. The system relies on anticipation. Peasants comply because they know what comes next if they do not. Within villages, these pressures shape relationships. Households compare burdens quietly, noting who owes more, who has been spared. Resentment exists, but open complaint is dangerous. Solidarity is fragile when scarcity dominates. Everyone is struggling. Few can afford generosity. The psychological weight of constant obligation is heavy. It teaches caution. A good year is not celebrated fully because good years invite increased demands. Prosperity becomes suspicious. Modesty is safer. Visibility attracts attention, and attention brings claims. Children absorb this lesson early. They watch food leave the household, carried away in sacks and carts. They learn that effort does not guarantee reward, only obligation. This understanding shapes ambition, keeping it narrow and contained. Yet peasants are not entirely passive. They adapt where they can. Grain is hidden, portions underreported. Gardens are planted discreetly. Livestock is kept small and easily concealed. These acts are not rebellion. They are survival strategies, practiced quietly and shared cautiously. The church's role complicates resentment. While it takes its share, it also offers charity during crises, alms, bread, occasional relief. This dual role blurs lines between support and extraction. Gratitude and frustration coexist, neither fully canceling the other. Over time, these systems normalize loss. Peasants think in terms of what will be taken rather than what will be kept. This inversion shapes planning, emotion, and expectation. Security is measured not by possession, but by endurance. As winter approaches and stores are counted again, the impact of these taxes becomes stark. Each missing sack echoes in empty bowls. Each coin paid reduces options later. The costs are not abstract. They are felt directly, daily. Yet the system persists because it is layered with legitimacy, legal, religious, customary. To resist one layer is to confront them all. Few are willing or able to do so. Survival requires compliance. When night falls and households gather around dim fires, conversations circle carefully. Complaints are voiced obliquely, wrapped in humor or resignation. The truth is known, but rarely spoken plainly. Much of what is grown does not stay. and so the peasant learns to live with disappearance, to watch effort leave the household and adjust accordingly. Loss becomes routine. The ability to endure it, quietly and continuously, becomes a defining skill, as essential as any tool in the fields. Part 12. Law that didn't belong to you. Justice seen from below. For the peasant, law is not an abstract idea written in books or debated in distant halls. It is something felt rather than understood, experienced not as protection but as pressure. Justice exists, but it does not belong equally to everyone. It flows downward, shaped by hierarchy, custom, and power, settling most heavily on those with the least ability to resist it. The manorial court is the center of legal life for most peasants. It meets at regular intervals, sometimes monthly, sometimes less often, depending on local custom. Attendance is expected. To fail to appear is itself an offense. The court is not a place of appeal or fairness in the modern sense. It is a mechanism for maintaining order, collecting dues, and reinforcing authority. Proceedings are public. Peasants stand together in open spaces or simple halls, listening as cases are called. The atmosphere is formal but familiar. Everyone knows the routines, the language, the likely outcomes. There is little suspense. Justice here is predictable precisely because it is uneven. The Lord or his appointed representative presides. This figure embodies both judge and interested party. Disputes involving land, labor, or obligations are rarely neutral because the outcome almost always favors authority. Even when peasants bring complaints against one another, the framework ensures that order is preserved above all else. Fines are the most common punishment. They are efficient, visible, and profitable. A missed obligation, a boundary dispute, an insult spoken too openly, each carries a price. These fines are rarely calibrated to ability to pay. For a peasant household already stretched thin, even a small fine can destabilize months of planning. More serious offenses bring harsher consequences. Forced labor, confiscation of goods, temporary imprisonment, all are possible. Corporal punishment exists, though it is not always common. Its power lies less in frequency than in visibility. A punishment witnessed once can discourage many future transgressions. The language of law is inaccessible. Proceedings may be conducted in Latin or formal dialects unfamiliar to most peasants. Even when the words are understood, their implications are not always clear. Legal knowledge is power, and that power remains concentrated above. Ignorance is not excused. Not knowing the rule does not protect against its enforcement. Custom plays a central role. Much of the law is unwritten, passed down through practice rather than text. This makes it flexible in theory, but rigid in reality. Custom favors continuity. Change is slow, resisted, often viewed with suspicion. What has always been done is treated as what must continue to be done. This reliance on custom also makes justice personal. Outcomes can depend on reputation, relationships, and perceived obedience. A peasant known as compliant may receive leniency. One known as difficult may be punished more harshly for the same offense. Fairness is secondary to stability. Women experience the law differently, often more precariously. Their legal standing is tied to fathers, husbands, or male relatives. Disputes involving women are frequently framed around morality rather than rights. Accusations of impropriety, whether proven or not, carry severe social consequences. Defense is difficult when voice and authority are limited. Children are not exempt from legal structures. They are disciplined publicly, taught early that rules exist to be obeyed, not questioned. Punishment reinforces lessons already learned at home and in the fields. Compliance ensures survival. Crimes against peasants by those above them are rarely pursued. Violence, exploitation, or seizure of property by authority figures is often justified or ignored. The imbalance is understood. Justice does not promise equality, it promises order. This understanding shapes behavior deeply. Peasants avoid confrontation not because they lack grievances, but because they know the cost of expressing them. Silence becomes a form of protection. Endurance replaces protest. When conflicts arise between peasants, resolution is often sought informally first, through negotiation, mediation by elders, quiet compromise. Formal courts are last resorts, unpredictable and costly. Community cohesion matters, not because it is harmonious, but because division invites scrutiny from above. Punishment also carries shame. Being fined or disciplined publicly marks a household. Reputation matters in a small community. Shame can linger longer than the penalty itself, affecting marriage prospects, trust, and cooperation. The law thus extends its influence beyond the moment of judgment. Yet peasants are not entirely powerless. They learn the boundaries of enforcement, where rules bend slightly, where oversight is weaker. Small acts of resistance occur: delayed compliance, quiet evasion, collective inaction. These are subtle, calculated, rarely heroic. Survival depends on knowing how far one can go without crossing invisible lines. The threat of punishment shapes thought itself. Decisions are filtered through anticipation of consequences. Not what is right, but what is safe. This constant calculation is exhausting, yet necessary. It narrows imagination, limits possibility. Justice, as experienced here, is not about truth. It is about maintenance, of hierarchy, of labor flow, of predictable order. It preserves a system that depends on unequal power by making that inequality feel inevitable. Over time, this legal environment leaves marks on the soul. It teaches humility, caution, and restraint. It also fosters quiet resentment, a sense that fairness is something that exists elsewhere, for others. When peasants speak of justice, they do so carefully, often through metaphor or humor. Direct criticism is dangerous. Stories carry meaning where arguments cannot. Complaints are softened, disguised, passed along indirectly. As night falls after a court day, households recount outcomes in hushed tones. Relief mixes with frustration. A fine paid means less food later. A warning issued means anxiety going forward. Life adjusts around these decisions without pause. The law does not end at the courtroom. It lingers in memory, in habit, in fear. It shapes how peasants walk, speak, and think. It is always present, even when unseen. For those who live beneath it, justice is not a shield. It is a weight, another burden, carried quietly alongside hunger, labor, and faith. It does not belong to them, yet it governs them completely, leaving little room for appeal and none for escape. Part 13. Marriage without romance, family as a unit of survival. Marriage for the medieval peasant is not the beginning of a love story. It is the reinforcement of a system. It joins labor to labor, obligation to obligation, field to field. Emotion may exist, sometimes deeply, but it is secondary, quiet, practical, and rarely indulged. What matters most is whether a household can endure. Courtship, as imagined in later centuries, is largely absent. Choices are narrow, shaped by proximity, property, and necessity. Most peasants marry within their village or nearby ones, not because of tradition alone, but because movement is limited and familiarity offers predictability. Families consider land, tools, animals, and reputation. Compatibility is measured in endurance, not affection. The timing of marriage is strategic. A household needs labor. A young man marries when he can sustain a family, or when his parents need help. A young woman marries when her labor is required elsewhere, when mouths at home outnumber resources. These decisions are made collectively, discussed quietly, guided by necessity rather than desire. Weddings themselves are modest. There may be a brief celebration, shared food, a moment of music or laughter, but it is restrained. Excess invites attention and expense. The ceremony marks a transition not into romance, but into responsibility. Two people step into roles already defined, expected to perform them without complaint. Within marriage, roles are clear and rigid. Men labor primarily in the fields, though they may also handle repairs, transport, and dealings with authority. Women labor everywhere: fields, home, animals, children. Their work is constant and varied, often invisible, rarely acknowledged. The success of a household depends heavily on women's labor, yet authority rarely reflects this dependence. Affection is expressed quietly, if at all. There is little time or space for it. Privacy is scarce. Emotional expression is restrained by fatigue and social expectation. Love, when it exists, is shown through shared endurance, through extra effort during illness, through protection during hardship, through silent understanding built over years. Conflict is inevitable. Stress accumulates easily in conditions of scarcity. Arguments arise over food, labor, decisions that affect survival. There is no neutral ground for resolution. Disputes play out in the same cramped spaces where life unfolds. Silence often follows, not reconciliation. Silence is safer, less costly. Violence exists within marriages, though it is rarely discussed openly. Social norms often tolerate or excuse it, framing it as discipline or frustration rather than abuse. Women have limited recourse. Legal protection is minimal. Community intervention is rare unless conflict becomes disruptive. Endurance is expected. Children arrive early and often. Birth control is limited, unreliable, or forbidden. Each pregnancy carries risk. Childbirth is dangerous, exhausting, and frequent. Women recover quickly because they must, returning to labor even while bodies are still healing. Motherhood is not sentimentalized. It is demanding and relentless. Children are valued not only as family, but as future labor. This does not mean they are unloved. It means they are essential. Their survival matters deeply, yet emotional attachment is tempered by realism. Loss is common. Parents guard their hearts carefully, loving while knowing that nothing is guaranteed. The household operates as a unit of production. Meals, labor, planning, everything is collective. Individual desires are secondary to group survival. Decisions are pragmatic. Sentiment rarely overrides necessity. When it does, consequences follow quickly. Elderly parents often remain within the household, contributing what they can until they cannot. Care is provided not out of obligation alone, but because there is no alternative. There are no institutions for the aged. Dependency is managed within families, adding strain to already limited resources. Marriage also binds households socially. Alliances form, obligations extend outward. Support networks are informal but crucial. During illness or crisis, relatives may help, briefly, cautiously, aware that generosity has limits when scarcity is shared. Widowhood is common, life expectancy is low, and risks are constant. A widow's position is precarious. Without a husband's labor or legal standing, survival becomes more difficult. Remarriage is often necessary, sometimes rapid, driven by need rather than choice. Men who lose wives face similar challenges, especially when children are involved. Domestic labor must be replaced. Households reorganize quickly, adapting to loss with practicality rather than prolonged mourning. The idea of marriage as personal fulfillment does not apply here. Fulfillment, if it exists, comes from survival, from seeing children grow, from enduring together through hardship. These satisfactions are quiet, understated, rarely articulated. Yet within this structure, moments of genuine connection do occur. Shared laughter after a rare feast, comfort offered during grief, familiar routines that bring a sense of stability. These moments are not frequent, but they matter precisely because they are rare. As years pass, marriages deepen, not through romance, but through shared memory. Each hardship survived together binds partners more tightly than any vow. This bond is not passionate, but resilient. At night, after children sleep and work is set aside, couples lie close for warmth more than intimacy. Bodies are tired, words are few. The day has taken everything it can. Tomorrow will ask again. Marriage, in this world, is not about happiness as an ideal. It is about continuity. It ensures that fields are worked, children raised, obligations met. It anchors individuals within a structure larger than themselves. And so love, when it exists, is reshaped to fit these constraints, practical, quiet, and deeply intertwined with survival. It is not celebrated in songs or stories, but lived daily in endurance, forming the fragile core of peasant life. Part 14. Women of the Fields, Double Labor, Silent Endurance. A peasant woman's life is defined not by a single burden, but by accumulation. Work does not arrive in shifts or seasons. It layers itself, task upon task, responsibility upon responsibility, until there is no clear boundary between labor and existence. Her days are not divided between inside and outside, private and public. Everything belongs to her, and nothing truly does. From the first light of morning, her body is already engaged. Before fields are reached, there are fires to rekindle, water to fetch, children to rouse and feed. These tasks are not considered work in the same way plowing is. They are simply expected, invisible precisely because they never stop. By the time men step into the fields, women have already been laboring for hours. Field work does not exclude her. During planting and harvest, she joins the labor directly, sowing seed, cutting grain, gathering sheaves, carrying loads that strain her back and arms. Her hands know the same roughness, the same cuts and calluses. Yet when field work pauses, her labor does not. She returns home to continue tasks that wait for no season. Food preparation alone is relentless. Grain must be cleaned, ground, soaked, cooked, vegetables washed, chopped, preserved. The hearth demands constant attention. Fires must be fed carefully, never too large, never allowed to die. Each meal requires planning, adaptation, patience. When supplies are low, ingenuity replaces abundance. Childbearing defines much of her physical life. Pregnancy is frequent and dangerous. There is no respite from labor during it. Women work until the moment of birth, often returning to tasks within days. Recovery is brief because survival requires it. Pain is expected. Exhaustion is normalized. Birth itself is a moment of both hope and terror. It takes place in the same cramped space where daily life unfolds. Assistance comes from other women, midwives, neighbors, who have endured the same risks. Death during childbirth is common enough to be anticipated, though never accepted lightly. Each birth carries the knowledge that it could be the last. Motherhood does not end at birth. Infants require constant care, breastfeeding, soothing, watching for illness. These tasks are woven into all others. A woman works with a child on her hip, adapts movements to protect fragile bodies while continuing necessary labor. When children fall ill, care intensifies even as work continues. Emotional labor, though unnamed, is significant. Women manage fear, grief, and uncertainty quietly. They absorb loss of children, of sisters, of neighbors, without public ceremony. Mourning happens between tasks, folded into routine. Tears are wiped away quickly. There is no time to linger. Social expectations reinforce silence. Women are expected to endure, to adapt, to sacrifice. Complaints are discouraged, framed as weakness or ingratitude. Strength is measured by resilience, not recognition. Their contributions are essential, yet rarely acknowledged as such. Authority rarely listens to women directly. Legal standing is limited. Decisions affecting households are made by men, lords, priests, husbands. Women influence outcomes indirectly through persuasion, persistence, quiet negotiation. Power is exercised subtly or not at all. Illness affects women differently. Nutritional deficiencies are common, worsened by repeated pregnancies and limited access to food. When resources are scarce, women often eat last, prioritizing children and working men. Their own health erodes gradually, unnoticed until it fails. Yet women are central to community life. They share knowledge of herbs, remedies, food preservation. They support one another during births, illnesses, crises. These networks are informal but vital, offering care where institutions do not. Older women, no longer bearing children, take on new roles. They care for grandchildren, manage domestic spaces, pass on skills. Their authority grows quietly with experience, though it remains unofficial. Wisdom accumulates even as bodies weaken. Moments of rest are rare and fragile. A conversation at the well, a shared laugh during communal work. These brief connections sustain spirit even when bodies are strained. Joy appears quietly, without fanfare. Women's lives are deeply intertwined with cycles of birth, growth, decay. They measure time through bodies as much as seasons. Each year leaves marks, both visible and hidden. Despite everything, peasant women are not defined solely by suffering. They demonstrate resilience that shapes entire households. Without their labor, survival would be impossible. Their endurance underpins the entire social structure, even as it goes unrecognized. At night, when fires dim and children sleep, women collapse into rest that is never complete. Minds remain alert, planning tomorrow's tasks, worrying over fragile balances. Sleep is shallow, easily broken. Their lives are lived largely without record. Chronicles rarely mention them, yet they are everywhere, working, caring, enduring. They carry the weight of the world quietly, shaping history not through power, but through persistence. In fields and homes, through births and losses, peasant women sustain life itself. Their labor is constant, their strength assumed, their presence essential. They are the unseen backbone of medieval society, holding everything together through sheer endurance, asking little in return and receiving even less. Part 15. Childhood that ended early. When play was brief, childhood, for a peasant, is not a protected season. It is a narrow passage between helplessness and usefulness, crossed quickly and without ceremony. There is no clear moment when childhood ends. It simply thins, stretches, and disappears beneath responsibility. What remains is not innocence lost in a single blow, but curiosity slowly redirected toward necessity. From the earliest years, children are present where work happens. They sit near the hearth as meals are prepared, watching hands move through familiar motions. They follow adults into fields, not as helpers at first, but as observers learning patterns. The world they absorb is practical and immediate. Questions are answered briefly. Lessons are given through demonstration, not explanation. Play exists, but it is fleeting and improvised. A stick becomes a toy. A stone is rolled, thrown, balanced. Games happen in the margins of labor, while waiting for water to heat, while animals graze, while adults speak quietly nearby. Laughter appears, then fades when work resumes. There is no separate space reserved for play, no time set aside to protect it. As soon as bodies allow, children are assigned tasks. These begin small and grow heavier with time. Gathering firewood, carrying water, herding animals, weeding gardens. None of these are optional. They are framed as contributions, proof that a child is becoming useful. Praise comes not for imagination, but for reliability. Mistakes are corrected quickly, sometimes harshly, not because adults lack patience, but because errors have consequences. A gate left open can mean lost livestock. A fire left unattended can destroy a home. Children learn caution early, not as a moral lesson, but as survival instinct. Education beyond this practical training is rare. Literacy is uncommon, and when it exists, it is often limited to religious instruction provided by the church. Even then, learning to read is not a path to opportunity. It is an exception, not a promise. Most children will never encounter letters in a meaningful way. Hunger shapes childhood profoundly. Growing bodies require food that is often scarce. Children learn early to ignore hunger's signals, to accept smaller portions without complaint. Their growth reflects this scarcity. shorter stature, thinner frames, delayed development. These conditions are normalized, seen not as deprivation, but as reality. Illness strikes children often and unpredictably. Fevers come and go. Some pass quickly, others do not. Parents respond with care when possible, but options are limited. Loss is common enough that families guard their emotional investment carefully. Love exists, but it is tempered by awareness that nothing is guaranteed. Work accelerates adolescence. By the time a child reaches their early teens, they are often fully integrated into adult labor. Boys take on heavier field work, learning to handle tools and animals. Girls assume increased domestic responsibilities, caring for younger siblings, preparing food, assisting in fields during peak seasons. The transition is gradual but irreversible. There is little concept of personal aspiration. Children do not ask what they will become. They know. Futures are visible in the adults around them, in bodies worn by years of labor, in routines repeated endlessly. Imagination is shaped to fit what is possible, not what is desirable. Authority is learned early. Children observe how adults interact with lords, priests, and officials. They internalize caution, deference, and restraint. These behaviors are not taught explicitly. They are absorbed through repetition and consequence. A child who speaks out of turn learns quickly what silence is worth. Family bonds are strong, forged through shared labor and dependency. Siblings rely on one another, older children caring for younger ones as a matter of course. Responsibility flows downward as much as upward. These bonds provide comfort, but also obligation. Individual needs are secondary to group survival. Moments of joy do exist. Seasonal festivals, shared meals on feast days, stories told by firelight. These experiences punctuate routine, offering brightness without altering structure. Children remember these moments vividly, not because they are extraordinary, but because they are rare. Punishment is common and often physical. It is justified as instruction rather than cruelty. Discipline reinforces the seriousness of responsibility. A child who fails to perform a task endangers more than themselves. This logic makes strictness feel necessary, even compassionate. The environment itself hastens maturity. Exposure to weather, tools, animals, and illness leaves little room for naivety. Children understand death early, not as an abstract concept, but as an event that happens nearby. Funerals are attended, graves are seen, absence becomes familiar, gender roles solidify quickly, expectations diverge, narrowing paths. Girls are prepared for marriage and motherhood early, learning skills that will sustain households. Boys are prepared for labor and obligation, learning to endure physical strain. Deviations are discouraged, sometimes mocked. Despite this early burden, children are not devoid of curiosity or spirit. They ask questions when they can. They explore boundaries cautiously. They form friendships, share secrets, invent small rituals of their own. These acts do not challenge the structure of their lives, but they soften it. As childhood fades, what remains is a young adult already shaped by labor, scarcity, and expectation. There is no dramatic rite of passage, no celebration marking the change. One day, a child simply carries the same weight as everyone else. Looking back later, if reflection is possible, many peasants do not mourn childhood's loss. It was brief, but it belonged to a world that demanded early contribution. Survival required it. Regret is a luxury rarely afforded, and so childhood ends quietly, folded into routine like everything else. Play gives way to work. Questions give way to tasks. The body grows accustomed to responsibility long before it grows strong enough to bear it easily. In this world, childhood is not protected time. It is preparation, and when it ends, it leaves behind not innocence, but readiness, the readiness to endure, to contribute, and to continue a life already shaped by the land, the season, and the weight of necessity. Part 16. Famine, War, and Passing Armies, Disasters Without Warning. The stability of a peasant's life is defined not only by the rhythms of the land, but by the constant threat of disruption. Famine, War and the passing of armies are forces that loom over daily existence, felt in ways that are both subtle and immediate. These disasters arrive without warning, altering the fragile balance between survival and ruin. The peasant's world is one where calamity is never distant, always lurking at the edge of perception, ready to tip the scales. Famine is perhaps the most insidious of these disruptions. It creeps in slowly, a tightening of the world that is not immediately visible but is always present. It begins with bad weather, a spring too wet to plant, a summer too dry to yield. Crops fail, and the first signs of scarcity appear quietly. Seeds are saved with greater caution, grain is measured more carefully, and the awareness that food will be thinner next year becomes a constant concern. But famine does not truly reveal itself until the hunger begins to bite. First, it appears as a slight discomfort. Meals are smaller, less varied, but the body can still function. Then, it becomes a persistent ache. The body learns to ignore hunger, to endure it quietly, but the toll is evident in each passing month. Children grow weaker, adults move more slowly. The energy to work, to toil under the unyielding sun slips away. As stores dwindle, the peasant turns to whatever is available: roots, herbs, even tree bark, anything to fill the gap. Livestock is slaughtered early, though this only brings temporary relief. The prospect of surviving the winter grows ever more tenuous. The cold months become a terrifying unknown, where every grain saved becomes an essential lifeline. Without sufficient food, the body becomes more vulnerable to illness, and in this weakened state, even a common cold can turn fatal. When famine strikes, the community is tested. Bartering becomes essential. What was once taken for granted, basic goods, time, energy, becomes scarce. Neighbors who once shared a meal now exchange a portion of grain for firewood or a few extra eggs for a handful of dried meat. But these exchanges only go so far. People are forced to confront a simple, brutal reality. If one family runs out, the whole village is at risk. When famine truly sets in, it does not just affect the individual, it impacts everyone in the community. War brings another type of upheaval, one marked by the sound of marching feet and the clank of armor. Armies, as much a part of the medieval landscape as the fields, pass through villages like storms. They come, they take, and they leave, leaving behind scorched earth and abandoned homes. Sometimes they stop to pillage, sometimes they don't. The threat of invasion or rebellion by neighboring lords is never far, and when soldiers arrive, peasants have few options. Soldiers do not distinguish between the lord's land and the peasants. A lord's soldiers are often conscripted from the very same villages they raid. These soldiers may be hungry too, desperate for food and supplies, and they see no distinction between the rich man's house and the poor man's. In their eyes, everything is fair game. When armies pass through, there are often no defenses for the village. The peasant has no walls to protect them, no castles to retreat to. They must hide or flee, hoping to preserve what little they have left. Even then, they cannot escape the terror that comes with the sight of men in armor. The fear is not just of injury or death, but of losing everything: homes burned, crops stolen, livestock taken. And yet, when the armies leave, when the dust settles, there is little time for recovery. The fields may be scorched, the animals driven away. The harvest that should have been gathered is now gone. The village is left to pick up the pieces, to rebuild from the scraps that remain. Those who survive find themselves more vulnerable than before, their strength sapped by the demands of the seasons, the weight of constant work, and the aftermath of war. When news of conflict spreads, the peasant's world is thrown into chaos. Men of fighting age are called away, often at the worst time of year, just before the harvest or during planting. This leaves families without the primary labor needed to sustain themselves. In their absence, women and children must take up the slack, shouldering the additional weight of work already stretched thin. The emotional burden of war, the fear of loss, the uncertainty of return, grows heavy, carried silently by those who wait, day by day. The passage of armies does not always mean violence. It can also bring opportunity, as armies seek food and shelter. Some peasants may be able to trade grain or services for protection or for some reward. Others may take the opportunity to flee, seeking refuge in nearby forests or other villages, hoping to avoid the worst of the violence. But for most, there is no escaping the intrusion. The land does not belong to them. It belongs to those who control it. And when the balance of power shifts, so does their fate. These disruptions, whether famine, war, or disease, do not simply break the rhythm of life. They reshape it. They reframe what it means to survive. Peasants who experience multiple years of famine or frequent military incursions learn to expect little from the world and everything from themselves. They develop a resilience born of necessity, a silent endurance that carries them through the hardest seasons. And when peace, however temporary, finally returns, the village begins again, not in triumph, but in survival. The scars of war fade into the background of daily life, and famine's lingering effects dissolve into the constant rhythm of labor. But the memory of what can be lost remains ever present. As the sun sets on the land, casting long shadows over fields and homes, the reality of peasant life settles in again. The world outside may shift violently, but within the village there is only continuity, a return to the land, to the work, to the cycle that will never truly end. Tomorrow will come with its own demands, and the peasants, scarred by the past, but undeterred, will rise to meet them. Part 17. The Plague Years. Death without meaning. There are moments in history when ordinary hardship is eclipsed by something vast and incomprehensible. For the medieval peasant, the years of plague are such moments, not because suffering is new, but because its scale strips suffering of explanation. Hunger can be endured, labor can be survived, even war follows patterns the land has learned to absorb. But plague arrives without rhythm, without fairness, without reason that can be trusted. It begins quietly, as so many disasters do. A rumor carried by travelers, a distant town where people are said to be dying quickly. At first, the village listens without alarm. Illness is common, death is familiar. There is no reason to believe this sickness is different. Fields still need tending, animals still need care. Life continues. Then the sickness arrives. It does not announce itself clearly. A fever here, a cough there, a swelling that appears suddenly beneath the arm or along the neck. At first, families assume it will pass. They always do. But this illness does not follow the usual path. It worsens rapidly. Bodies weaken within days, sometimes hours. Breathing becomes labored. Skin darkens or bruises without cause. Pain arrives swiftly and does not leave. Fear spreads faster than the disease itself. Peasants do not understand contagion, but they understand patterns. They notice that those who care for the sick often fall ill themselves. They notice that entire households disappear in a matter of weeks. They notice that prayer, which has always offered at least structure, now feels unanswered. Bells toll constantly, marking deaths too frequent to count individually. Homes that were once crowded with noise and movement fall silent. Fires go unlit. Animals wander untended. The village landscape changes quickly, not through destruction, but through absence. Gaps appear where families once lived. Fields go unworked. Paths grow quiet. Care during the plague is desperate and intimate. There are no physicians willing to treat peasants, and even those who might help are powerless. Remedies are attempted, herbs, bloodletting, charms, prayers, but none halt the progress of the illness. Families tend to their own until fear overwhelms duty. Some flee, others stay, bound by loyalty, love, or resignation. Death loses ceremony. Funerals are rushed or abandoned altogether. Graves are shallow, sometimes shared. The living no longer have the strength or time to mark each loss properly. Names blur together. Grief accumulates faster than it can be processed. For survivors, guilt settles heavily. Why did this person live when others did not? Faith offers explanations, God's will, punishment, testing, but these feel thin against the randomness of survival. The moral order peasants have relied upon begins to fracture. Obedience no longer guarantees safety. Piety no longer ensures protection. Work stops, not by choice, but by necessity. There are too few hands. Oxen wander unyoked. Crops rot in the fields. Hunger follows disease closely, compounding devastation. Those who survive the sickness face a different threat, starvation in a world suddenly emptied of labor. Social boundaries shift subtly. With so many dead, obligations become difficult to enforce. Lords lose tenants. Fields lie abandoned. In some places, survivors find themselves in unfamiliar positions of leverage. Labor becomes scarce. Demands soften, not out of compassion, but necessity. Yet for many peasants, this change comes too late. Entire villages vanish. Knowledge disappears with the people who carried it. Traditions fade quietly. Songs go unsung. Skills are lost without record. Children who survive grow up surrounded by absence. They remember faces no longer present. They inherit land and responsibilities too early, shaped by loss rather than continuity. Their understanding of the world is marked by uncertainty. Nothing feels permanent anymore, not even the suffering they once thought inevitable. Communal trust erodes. Fear lingers long after the sickness passes. Neighbors eye one another cautiously. Touch becomes suspect. Shared bowls are avoided when possible. Rituals change subtly, shaped by memory rather than instruction. The church struggles to maintain authority during these years. Clergy die alongside peasants. Explanations multiply, contradict, and confuse. Some find faith strengthened by catastrophe. Others feel abandoned. Doubt, once quietly suppressed, surfaces more openly, though still rarely voiced. When the plague finally loosens its grip, it does not end cleanly. It recedes unevenly, leaving scars that persist for generations. Fields slowly return to use. Homes are rebuilt or reclaimed. Life resumes, but not as it was. Survivors carry a new awareness. Death has shown itself as arbitrary, not always deserved, not always meaningful. This knowledge alters how peasants endure hardship. They still work, they still obey. But beneath routine, something has shifted. Silence deepens. At night, in homes half empty, survivors listen to familiar sounds. Wind through thatch, animals stirring, and feel how different they are now. The world feels larger, more fragile. Survival feels less like destiny and more like chance. The plague years leave no heroes among peasants, only witnesses. They are remembered not for triumph, but for endurance without explanation, for living through something that offered no lesson, no clear moral, only absence. And in that absence, peasants learn a harsh truth. Suffering does not always teach, and survival does not always mean understanding. When the bells finally fall silent, when graves stop multiplying, the land waits again. It always does. And the peasant, changed, thinned, still standing, returns to work beneath a sky that looks no different than before, carrying memories that will never quite settle back into the soil. Part 18. Small moments of light, festivals, songs, shared bread. Against the weight of routine, there are moments, brief, fragile, when the world softens. They do not last long enough to change a life, but they last long enough to remind it why continuing is possible. For the peasant, these moments are not escapes from hardship. They are interruptions, small openings where warmth enters before closing again. Festivals arrive according to the church calendar, spaced carefully through the year like breaths taken between long exertions. They do not erase hunger or labor, but they reframe them for a time. Work pauses, or at least slows. Fields are left alone for a day. Tools are set aside. The body notices the difference immediately. Sound changes first. Where days are usually filled with the scrape of tools and the steady rhythm of work, festivals bring music, simple instruments, rough voices raised together. Songs are known by everyone, passed down without authorship, altered slightly by each generation, They speak of saints, seasons, foolish lords, clever animals. Their melodies are repetitive, easy to remember, shaped for communal voices rather than performance. Food changes too, if only modestly. Bread is still coarse, but portions are larger. The pot is fuller. A bit of meat may appear, shared carefully among many. Ale flows more freely, its warmth loosening speech and posture. These meals are not extravagant, but they are different, and difference itself becomes a form of abundance. Laughter appears more easily. It is cautious at first, then steadier. Jokes circulate quietly, often self-deprecating, sometimes pointed just enough to release tension without inviting consequence. Humor becomes a safe language for complaint, allowing truth to surface briefly before being set aside again. Children experience these days most vividly. They run freely, inventing games, mimicking dances, absorbing a sense that life contains more than work. Adults watch them with a mix of fondness and restraint, aware that tomorrow routine will return. These moments are allowed, but not indulged too deeply. Hope must be managed. Community gathers in visible ways. People who usually labor separately stand together. Faces are seen in different light. Relationships deepen subtly, not through confession, but through shared presence. These connections matter. They strengthen networks that will be relied upon when hardship returns. Religious rituals frame these gatherings, lending them legitimacy. Processions move through villages. Candles are lit. Prayers are spoken aloud. Faith here is communal and embodied, less about doctrine than participation. The sacred and the social intertwine, each reinforcing the other. Beyond festivals, smaller moments of light appear unpredictably. A successful harvest finished early, a birth that ends well, a neighbor offering help without being asked. These moments are not celebrated formally, but they are noticed. They linger in memory, revisited during harder days. Even within routine, small pleasures persist. The warmth of sun during a brief rest, the smell of bread baking, the comfort of shared silence after long labor. These sensations do not change circumstances, but they soften them, making endurance feel less empty. Storytelling plays a role here. Evenings sometimes stretch long enough for tales, legends of heroes, cautionary fables, exaggerated accounts of distant places. These stories are not believed literally. They are enjoyed for their ability to transport listeners briefly elsewhere, to expand imagination without threatening reality. Songs continue beyond festivals, hummed quietly during work, sung softly to children. Music becomes a companion rather than an event. It fills gaps without demanding attention, offering rhythm where none is given. These moments of light are precious precisely because they are rare. They do not promise improvement. They do not suggest escape. They simply offer relief, a reminder that life contains texture beyond effort and fear. Peasants understand this intuitively. They do not expect happiness as a state. They accept it as an occurrence. When it appears, they receive it fully, without clinging. Clinging would make its absence unbearable. The return to routine after such moments is gentle but firm. Work resumes. Hunger reasserts itself. Authority returns to its usual shape. Yet something lingers, a memory, a shared glance, a tune caught in the mind. These traces carry forward, subtly strengthening resolve. In the harsh arithmetic of survival, these moments may seem insignificant. They do not increase yield or extend life, but they sustain spirit, and spirit matters when nothing else can be changed. As evening settles after a festival, fires burn lower, voices soften. People return to homes that look the same as before. Tomorrow will demand everything again, but tonight, memory is warm, and that warmth is enough. These small lights do not dispel the darkness of peasant life. They puncture it briefly, like stars in a wide night sky, distant, fleeting, but real. And for those who live beneath that sky, they offer a reason to keep walking the familiar paths, carrying both burden and memory together. Part 19, Change that Came Too Slowly. the long end of medieval peasantry. Change, when it finally comes to the peasant's world, arrives quietly and unevenly. It does not announce itself as liberation. It does not arrive with certainty or relief. Instead, it seeps in through small disruptions, altered customs, shifting demands, unfamiliar possibilities that feel more unsettling than hopeful. For many peasants, change comes not as opportunity, but as confusion layered onto already difficult lives. After the plague years, the land looks different. Fields lie empty where families once worked them. Entire households are gone, leaving tools unused, homes collapsing into themselves. Labor has become scarce in places where it was once abundant. This scarcity alters the balance of power, but only slightly, and not everywhere at once. Lords find themselves in unfamiliar positions. Estates cannot function without workers. Harvests fail, not from weather alone, but from lack of hands. In some regions, demands soften, not out of compassion, but necessity. Rents are renegotiated, obligations shift. Peasants discover, cautiously, that refusal does not always bring immediate punishment. For the first time in generations, some peasants are able to move, not freely, not safely, but more easily than before. Abandoned lands elsewhere offer possibility. Wages are whispered about, payment for labor rather than obligation tied to soil. This idea is unsettling. Freedom, even partial, carries risk. To leave familiar fields is to step into uncertainty without the protection of custom. Those who remain feel the tension. Villages thin, social bonds weaken as families depart. Traditions falter when fewer people remain to carry them. Knowledge once passed easily from elder to child becomes fragmented. Continuity, which once felt oppressive, now feels fragile. Attempts to restore old order follow quickly. Laws are passed to fix wages, restrict movement, reassert control. Authority does not relinquish power willingly. The memory of dependence lingers among lords and institutions. They seek to bind peasants again, to free society in familiar shapes. Resistance appears, but it is uneven and risky. Some peasants push back quietly, demanding better terms, refusing excess labor, leaving when they can. Others comply, fearing retaliation or instability more than oppression. There is no unified movement, no shared vision of change. Survival remains the priority. Urban centers grow slowly, drawing some peasants away from rural life. Towns promise wages, anonymity, and different forms of hardship. For those who make the transition, life does not become easy, only different. Work remains exhausting, poverty persists, yet the relationship to labor shifts. Time becomes something that can be sold rather than endlessly owed. For peasants who stay on the land, changes are subtle. Tools improve incrementally. Crop rotation spreads unevenly. Markets expand, connecting villages to broader economies. These developments promise efficiency, but they also introduce new vulnerabilities, price fluctuations, distant decisions affecting local survival. Generations overlap uneasily. Older peasants remember rigid systems and enforced immobility. Younger ones glimpse alternatives, however uncertain. Tension grows between acceptance and aspiration. The idea that life might be shaped differently takes root slowly, cautiously. Yet for most, change comes too late to matter personally. Bodies worn by decades of labor cannot easily adapt. Skills honed for one system do not translate smoothly to another. Even when opportunity appears, it favors the young, the unencumbered, the lucky. Women experience these transitions unevenly. New labor arrangements may increase their workload without increasing autonomy. Traditional expectations persist even as economic structures shift. Progress does not distribute itself fairly. Faith adjusts alongside these changes, reinterpreting hardship within new contexts. The Church continues to emphasize order, even as order itself shifts. Old explanations are repurposed rather than discarded. Meaning remains essential, even when certainty erodes. Revolts occur in some places, brief, intense, often crushed. They leave impressions rather than outcomes. They remind authorities of tension and remind peasants of risk. Most resistance remains quiet, expressed through movement, negotiation, and adaptation rather than confrontation. Over time, the category of peasant begins to blur. Some become tenant farmers, others wage laborers. Some drift between land and town. Identity grows less fixed, though insecurity remains. The old world loosens its grip without fully releasing it. For those living through this transition, there is little sense of historical significance. No one feels they are standing at the edge of an era. Life remains immediate, shaped by daily needs rather than long narratives. Change is measured not in ideals, but in whether the next winter can be survived. As years pass, the medieval order fades unevenly, leaving fragments behind. Customs persist, hierarchies remain, suffering continues, though its forms shift. The promise of improvement is real, but distant. For many peasants, the world changes around them without ever fully changing for them. They endure long enough to glimpse a different future, but not long enough to inhabit it comfortably. Their lives are bridges, connecting eras without belonging fully to either. When night falls on these later years, the land still lies dark and waiting. Tools are set aside as they always have been. Bodies rest where they can. The future feels closer now, but still uncertain. Change has come, but slowly, unevenly, and at great cost. And for most peasants, it arrives not as freedom, but as another condition to endure, layered gently, almost imperceptibly, onto lives already shaped by patience and restraint. Part 20. Remembering the unnamed, the lives history rarely speaks of. When the medieval world finally loosens its grip, it does not leave behind a clear ending. There is no final chapter written for the peasant, no moment when suffering is acknowledged and resolved. Instead, lives fade quietly into the background of history, absorbed into broader narratives of kings, wars, and institutions. What remains are traces, fields reshaped by centuries of labor, customs softened by time, and a silence where millions of voices once existed. Most peasants are never named. They do not appear in chronicles or illuminated manuscripts. Their births go unrecorded, their deaths marked only briefly, if at all. Memory of them survives not through words, but through continuity. The paths they walked remain worn. The villages they built persist, altered but recognizable. Their labor outlives them in ways they never intended. To remember these lives is not to romanticize them. There is no hidden nobility in constant hardship, no virtue inherent in deprivation. Peasant life was not quietly beautiful in its suffering. It was difficult, constraining, and often unfair. Endurance was not chosen, it was required. Survival was not a triumph, it was an obligation. Yet within this reality, something persistent emerges, a kind of quiet humanity that does not demand recognition, but deserves it nonetheless. Peasants formed families, tended land, cared for one another when they could. They laughed occasionally, they hoped cautiously, they carried forward knowledge that no institution bothered to record. How to read the sky, how to coax food from tired soil, how to endure loss without collapse. History often measures importance through power and change. By those standards, peasants appear passive. They did not reshape empires. They did not issue decrees, but they sustained everything that made power possible. Without their labor, there were no armies to march, no cities to feed, no institutions to maintain. Their work was constant, uncelebrated, and essential. Even suffering itself becomes invisible over time. Hunger leaves no monument. Exhaustion does not survive on stone. Disease empties villages without leaving clear markers. What is remembered instead are outcomes, economic shifts, population changes, stripped of the human cost that produced them. Peasant lives dissolve into statistics, their experiences flattened into abstraction. Yet, suffering shapes culture quietly. Values of patience, frugality, and resilience persist long after the conditions that demanded them fade. These traits are inherited subtly, embedded in habits and expectations, passed down through generations without acknowledgement of their origin. The peasant's world does not vanish, it transforms and disperses. When later centuries speak of progress, they often forget what progress replaced. New systems brought new opportunities, but also new hardships. The peasant did not step into comfort simply because medieval structures weakened. Many forms of labor remained exhausting. Many forms of poverty persisted. The past did not end, it echoed. To look back honestly is to resist simplification. Peasant life was not uniformly miserable, nor was it quietly content. It was complex, shaped by forces beyond individual control. It contained moments of warmth and connection alongside relentless constraint. These contradictions do not cancel one another. They coexist. Remembering the unnamed is an act of attention rather than nostalgia. It means acknowledging that most of human history was lived without agency, without recognition, without escape. That survival itself was the primary achievement, repeated daily without applause. There is something humbling in this recognition. It shifts perspective away from exceptional figures and toward ordinary endurance. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by those who command, but by those who persist. That continuity matters as much as change. In the quiet after work, in homes of smoke and straw, peasants lived entire lives that mattered deeply to those within them, even if they mattered little to the record. Love existed there. Fear existed there. Meaning was made in small, practical ways. These lives were not wasted because they were unseen. They were simply unrecorded. As listeners drift through these stories now, centuries later, there is a subtle reversal. Attention is given where none was expected. Time is paused briefly to consider lives that once had no time to pause themselves. This attention does not fix injustice or recover loss, but it restores presence. If you enjoyed drifting through this piece of the past, maybe leave a like, or just let the story carry you to sleep. If you'd like more quiet journeys like this one, you can subscribe, but only if it feels right. The world remembers you.